Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, it's late on a Monday night, but the Vikings somehow managed to win.
Monday night, Soldier Field, with expectations, on a roll. They managed to win against a backup quarterback too.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if that's allowed. Like, I'm pretty sure you have to look into whether or not, like, there was foul play here.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if the league ended up kind of reversing the result of the game.
I mean, anything is possible in 2020. We should just prepare ourselves for this. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We are doing a kind of a rapid reaction to the game that happened just about an hour and a half ago. It wrapped up here. I am with Arif Hassan of The Athletic. I'm changing up the intro, apparently, for no good reason, because we're tired. Fantastic. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about this game, including the play of Kirk Cousins, which was not necessarily a detriment to the Vikings. Some of you may be shocked by hearing that. Also, the fact that Cook wasn't all that big of a factor in the running game, too. Interesting, and the Vikings were able to pull it off. So we have all of that in a pretty good mailbag to talk about as well. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for sharing information about Norse Code out to others, whether it be on social media or just talking to a friend about it, and for those who have decided to go the extra mile and have donated to the Patreon. You can do so at patreon.com/NorseCode. If you provide up to $3.50 a month, that will give you access to not only bonus material, but we did a special kind of game day decision here to do a watch along with our Patreon folks. And that was a hell of a lot more fun than even I was expecting. That was really great, actually. We had about, I think the most people we had on was about 20 people. And of all people, Dusty showed up. And he didn't hold up a picture or didn't hold up like today's newspaper or anything, but he was there. He was referencing current events. He's not a puppet. He's not an actor, damn it. He is in fact Dusty. Dusty was with us for the first half, and then Arif ended up joining us for the second half. And we had a heck of a lot of fun. That was something that we will definitely have to do again.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun. I didn't realize that the Zoom call would be as populated as it was. So that was pretty cool. I was doing a ton of like live game day work with The Athletic, so I didn't think I'd be able to join at all. But there was not a ton to update in the app in the second half, so I had a little bit more free time. I thought I was only going to be there for halftime, but no, that was pretty good. It was a ton of fun interacting with you all.
Yeah, so that was really cool. We really enjoyed it, so we will definitely have to do another one of those before the end of the year is up. And this was just like a 3 o'clock call, like, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. I'm just going to post this out on Patreon. Anyone who wants to join us can. And then we had a whole chunk of people do it. So that was really cool. Again, thank you guys so much. We were able to do that because you guys are subscribed to Patreon. Patreon funds directly paid for that interaction. So if you enjoy that sort of thing and would like more of it, well, go to patreon.com/NorseCode and join up there. Bonus material will be posted for this week right around the time that we post the Thursday episode. It's a little late. We're not doing extra stuff tonight. We already did a 3.5 hour show, quote unquote, improv. Let's call that improv. But that was really cool. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to do just like a one-time donation. You can also support the show with our merch. We have merchandise. Don from Ohio and I were wearing the same shirt today. It was a little bit odd. We definitely should have called ahead to make sure we weren't wearing the same thing, but you too can support the Norse Code stuff over at norsecode.threadless.com and go ahead and click on the collections area and see all of the random items that we have up there, including stickers, including t-shirts, cell phone cases, baby onesies to help support Arif's parenting corner, that sort of thing. which was pretty. We talked a bit about that in the Patreon group as well tonight. So all of the various corners, and we tried to give Dusty a parenting corner, and he immediately decided this was a personal attack, and he didn't want to answer it again.
Well, so he volunteered for he was like, yeah, I'll answer a question, and then he got one question, and he was like, this sucks. I hate this.
The great thing about the Dusty thing is I was a surprise to the people who were in it. I had contacted him shortly after I got a message saying that it would go a long way to prove Dusty isn't dead to do it. And I was like, I'm going to text him just to see on the off chance whether or not he's available. And he's like, yeah, I've got something I need to be fashionably late for later tonight. Sure, I can. I could be a part of that. That'd be great. Then he comes on and has his name as Dusty O'Connell, winner of the Norse Code Fantasy League, to which Arif changed his name when he came on to that, to which I changed my name. So he didn't enjoy that at all.
That was great. I didn't say anything. Someone else in the chat noticed and was like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, well, no, I noticed when your name had come up on the screen. And I went, I have to be able to change my name, right? And they noticed me before they noticed you. And I was like, no, I'm followed Arif on this. A win for one of us is a win for all of us. So this is right. Just how this works. And someone was salty over that still. It was really fantastic. And someone called him out on his hatred of the Irish. So that was good. I can't remember if he legitimately does. He claims he doesn't, but we'll see about that. Well, all of that aside, welcome to this episode again. Thank you guys so much for listening, and let's get into the review of the Bears game, which was a bit different than previous wins this year in that Kirk Cousins did have to do a little bit more of the legwork, and it felt like Dalvin Cook was more of just was more of a supporting role, was in more of a supporting role this game. And the big star offensively was Justin Jefferson, who got the yards, but Thielen got the 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, no, Justin Jefferson helped set up both of the Thielen touchdowns. Also, that 54-yarder was really remarkable. So, yeah, I think that if anyone was the engine of the offense, it'd be Justin Jefferson. I mean, Kirk Cousins was 10 for 11 on third down. A lot of that was to Jefferson, who had, according to Eric Eager, 36 more yards this week on third down than any other receiver did this week. So, pretty huge. On critical downs, and it was like one reason that the Vikings were able to keep up despite just like the mess of special teams failures, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, no, it was a remarkable game for Jefferson, who was up against just a really strong cornerback group. I asked him like, hey, that group is not bad as far as cornerbacks go. What was it that allowed you to go off like that? Did you see something on the film or something? And he's like, well, we didn't do anything, remarkable in terms of preparing for them. They just play a ton of zone defense, and so we ran our zone beaters, and we just kind of trusted ourselves to make the plays. Which obviously that's what happened, but it was kind of cool to see him. To see him just kind of point out, like, it was less about beating the person across from me, and it was more about making sure that against the coverages that they called, that we had something. So yeah, I think as far as making sure they stayed ahead of their own mistakes, the Justin Jefferson was a critical part of that, especially because it's not as if Cousins was responsible for his pick. I mean, it was like bounced off of Adam Thielen's hands, and so that's just kind of a bad break. And so having a couple of bad breaks in the game, that's just going to mean that you've got to do all that much to overcome it.
It was quite the performance, and I'm not saying that it appeared that they thought that he was a bit of an afterthought, but it almost appeared that the Bears were viewing the passing game on the whole as a bit of an afterthought.
Yeah, we actually asked Zimmer about that. We were like, hey, so they seem to really key in on the run game. Is that kind of what helped open up the passing game? I mean, they're, the top passing defense in the league. What is it that helped enable it? And Zimmer was like, well, actually, it's not really like they keyed in on the running game any more than they typically do. And obviously, they're like the top run defense, right? So it was kind of surprising to hear him say that. And he's like, yeah, they don't really put A in the box. It's really a seven-man box. I think it's just, Roquan Smith has just come on so much in the past couple of weeks. He was really critical against Derrick Henry. He leads the league in tackles for loss. And the thing was, coming out of the draft, some people were worried, I think me included, about his ability to play against the run. And, his first season and the first couple of games this year, he wasn't really doing a remarkable job against the run. And so it just seemed like you'd be a very high level or possibly elite coverage linebacker and somebody who's okay against the run, kind of like what you want Eric Wilson to be. But he's turned out to be really remarkable against the run. So his ability alone, I think, has played a big part. Danny Trevathan obviously played well. They also, though they play too high, they're willing to put 5 on the line of scrimmage and still kind of account for all the gaps, and they involve the corners in the run game. That's a big part of the reason they play a lot of zone. So yeah, they like kind of design what they do around finding ways to stop the run with a 7-man box, which I think is kind of interesting, but it gives them some pretty big coverage advantages, and the Vikings were able to succeed despite that. And, hearing that they only have a 7-man box on a ton of plays, and the Vikings like to go heavy and put extra blockers in the box, and they still were only able to average like 3.3 or 3.0 or something like that yards per carry. I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
The other thing that's worth pointing out is this wasn't exactly like a slouch day for Dalvin Cook. He was able to be
30 carries, right?
Yeah, he was able to be effective and managed to turn a situation that could have been a fumble into something that he recovered himself, like using his own body. So, like, this wasn't like a slouch day for him. This just wasn't, 150 yards.
Yeah. I mean, he had 92 on the ground and another like 20 or so, maybe a little bit more through the air. He was a little bit better through the air than he was on the ground, honestly, even though he obviously gained, the majority of his total yards on the ground. But yeah, that's what the Vikings really needed to do, is they needed to find a way to get him in space with 1 or 2 good blockers, as opposed to just kind of run him up the middle. I mean, there were some times when he tried to reverse the field, it looked like he was going to break out, and he didn't. And I think there was a pretty decent chance that one of those small runs would turn big. He had 2 big runs that were called back on holding penalties, so that was kind of unfortunate for him. But he found ways here and there to kind of regain efficiency that was lost. But for the most part, the Vikings running game was kind of a losing proposition when they called it, especially, as a lot of people noted, on 2nd and long when they called it all the time. And that was where a lot of his big, like I think a 7-yard gain occurred on 2nd and long, for example. That was where a lot of his bigger gains were. So I think without the runs on 2nd and long, I mean, his average would have been like 2.2 or something, just kind of like locked up. But his individual play was probably pretty good. He just wasn't getting the blocking up front.
Yeah, it was definitely not a poor showing by him. It just, the stat line just doesn't have it, jump off the page like it had the previous Vikings wins, where he was such an integral part. He was still
he gained over 200 yards in those other games.
Yeah, he was still incredibly important, just not as much as the passing game, which we can talk about Kirk Cousins here for a moment. Decent game for the most part. There's obviously the interceptions that are worth mentioning, one off the hands of Adam Thielen. But this wasn't, Kirk Cousins gets a lot of crap, and a lot of it is justified. A lot of it isn't, about his performance in evening games. Yeah, and the fact that he's had this 0-9 record going into tonight as far as Monday night is concerned, and that monkey just always being on your back. It seemed good for him that he was able to get it. Like, somebody in the Patreon chat was like, why is Kirk Cousins screaming? And I wanted to yell, if you've like had a success of 1 in 10 and it took you 10 times to get that, you'd be yelling on the sidelines and yelling on the field too. Like on ESPN, when he was getting interviewed, he had a death grip on that game ball. There's no way he was giving that away to anybody. Like, this was a pretty good performance by Kirk Cousins overall, and the offensive line wasn't terrible.
In pass protection, it wasn't terrible. That's for sure.
Yeah.
He had a relatively clean pocket. I thought early on, there's a little bit worry about pressure, but for I think the most part, for most of the game, you could say that he had a clean pocket. He was able to get rid of the ball quickly. He only got sacked once. That was on a blitz. And honestly, that should have just been on him to get rid of the ball. When there was pressure, it really looked like he was causing it more than the offensive line was. And I think, when you go up against Akeem Hicks for most of the game, Khalil Mack for all of the game, that's saying a lot. They've got some pretty good pass rushers. So, obviously we talked about it with Lauren on the previous show. Obviously, missing out on some of the potential that they could have had with Eddie Goldman, I think on the COVID opt out list, and losing, I think, was it Bilal Nichols for this game, and losing Roy Robertson Harris. They kind of lucked out in terms of kind of the tertiary pass rushers, but the premier guys were still there, and so their ability to kind of hold up. Yeah, that's not something we've seen, I think, from a lot of this offensive line, especially along the interior. Garrett Bradbury had a really good game. I think both in the run and in pass protection. We'll see kind of what PFF has to say when they look at it in a little bit more detail than I did. But I thought Bradbury played well. Obviously, you've got your problems with Dozier. I thought Ezra Cleveland had some struggles, especially in the run game. But yeah, for the most part, from a pass protection standpoint, I'd say that Cousins was pretty lucky to have the pocket that he did, which allowed them to have a couple of those explosive plays that they needed to, because the play-to-play consistency wasn't necessarily there. It wasn't like this enormous problem, but it wasn't really there. Especially kind of there was like a middle of the game kind of lull where they weren't able to get into third and short or anything like that. But yeah, I'd say for the most part, yeah, a big part of Cousins' success was his ability to take advantage of the clean pockets that they gave him.
And just as a note, we recorded the show on Thursday night. We put the show out, and then this weekend the news about Drew Samia hit, about the fact that he was going on the COVID list, and then the Vikings activated Pat Elflein and then immediately got rid of him.
Yeah, well, actually, I think they activated him right before. Like, I don't know if they would have cut Drew, or if they would have cut Pat Elflein if they knew about the Drew Samia thing.
Yeah,
because I think they cut him right before he had either a positive test or was in close contact or something.
Yeah, the Jets immediately pick him up, probably due to Anthony Barr related spite.
The Jaguars also put in a claim, I think. So he had a couple of people that wanted his services. I guess I shouldn't be too shocked, but I'm a little surprised.
Well, I'm just surprised that the Jags would want to bring anyone in. Like, if they're this devoted to the situation, like, outside help, no. We're happy with the poop that we have. Thank you very much. We don't need to bring somebody in that might actually know what the hell they're doing. Maybe.
I don't know that Elflein would have guaranteed that either.
Well, it's introducing instability into a stable, terrible situation that they have.
Right? Yeah, they have consistency in how bad they are. You don't want to ruin that.
Yes, exactly. If you're really aiming for that draft pick, then why risk it? It's also worth noting that the Vikings defense, the corners especially, seem to be doing all right out there. And Harrison Smith turned out to be a bit of a monster on a couple of pass deflections and an interception.
Yeah, and he almost got a second interception off of, I want to say, was it Troy Dye batting the pass? But yeah, who was it that was on Anthony Miller? Was looks like it might have been Jeff Gladney, but yeah, no, they did a lot of good work overall. That secondary, you had Chris Boyd, you had Jeff Gladney, you had Chris Jones. I think Harrison Smith just called them the Chris's. That played really well. I'm just shocked that Chris Jones is playing as well as he is. I mean, he's not like playing like the best corner in the league, but he's already playing like in average, or I don't know, maybe even above average corner. I mean, I don't know that we have necessarily a great sample to say that we've got a lot. But yeah, he was on the Lions practice squad 3 weeks ago, and he's playing like, he's a big part of this defense. So, good play from him. Obviously, good play from Gladney, who was able to generate not just some pretty tight windows to throw into, but also tackles for loss. That was pretty big for them. Chris Boyd obviously, played all right. But yeah, I mean, Allen Robinson only got 46 yards. Foles had to throw through some tight windows, which he's not necessarily always great at. Harrison Smith had the game of his life. Maybe not the game. He's had better games, I guess, technically, but that really just speaks to kind of how good he is, more than anything else, because this is a really phenomenal game for him. But yeah, pass deflection, a pick, nearly another pick. I think he showed up pretty well, both as a pass rusher and in the run game. So huge game for him. It seemed like he was really keyed into everything the Bears were doing. I asked him, like, hey, on the pick, obviously was a deflection, but like, did you see anything when you closed in on it? And he's like, no, it was nothing special. I just played my zone and I just kind of closed in when I could and, converted an opportunity. So, um, yeah, I don't know. He just played like really sound, fundamental, clean football. It also just happens to be a super highly talented player. Or when you do that, it turns into a really excellent game. So yeah, if anybody was the key, if there was one key on defense, I'd say it's probably him. Although I don't know, that defensive line was like shockingly good. I can't wait to re-review what they did.
Yeah, well, before we go into the defensive line, there was a play that Harrison Smith had as a to do a pass deflection, or just to really defend the ball, where he was over the top behind the receiver.
Oh yeah, that was phenomenal.
Oh,
was that Anthony Miller too? That was incredible.
Yeah, that was around the time that he did that. It was like, all right, Harrison Smith is going to have he is going to have a game out there today. He already had the pick at that point, and he was punching balls out and just all over the field. Like if you were watching anyone on defense, it felt like you probably should have been watching Harrison Smith.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Was that the 3rd and 7 maybe to Allen Robinson? 3rd and 10 maybe? That was just so remarkable that he did that, and it looked like it was just secured already. But then he grabs like 2 more pass deflections on top of that. Yeah, I think it was the 3rd and 7 because I think the other one was like a QB hit. Yeah, no, just really phenomenal stuff from him. Yeah, impacted every phase of the game: pass rush, run defense, and as a coverage defender, not just in grabbing an interception, but also grabbing a really set of key pass deflections. So yeah, huge from him. I mean, he showed up everywhere.
Foles was not having a good game. Foles also found himself on his back a couple of times due to the defensive backs of the Vikings, which I do find it odd that the Vikings seem to be doing better since they traded Ngakoue. I'm not saying that causation and correlation or anything, but it's odd to see the rest of the team like step up right now.
It is unusual. I guess it gives some more opportunities, but they did have that opportunity in week 1 when Ngakoue didn't play a ton. And he hasn't played like every single down, and they didn't show up on those other downs that he played. So it's difficult to say, hey, this is probably because of Ngakoue, but it is like, kind of enormous that they've been able to step up after they've had so many losses along the defensive line. I think 11 quarterback hits, something like wild and nuts. And some of that is on the blitzes, right? Eric Wilson has 2 quarterback hits. One of them is a sack. Harrison Smith has a quarterback hit. Troy Dye has a quarterback hit. They were pretty comfortable blitzing their guys. So it's not like, I think Eric Hendricks got a pressure as well. So it's not as if, it's all the defensive line, but they all stepped up in their own way. DJ Wanham had a really great game. Not only did he get a sack, he had 2 other quarterback hits and a tackle for loss. Yeah, Hercules Mataafa showed up pretty big. I think he was a key player on a couple of those 3rd downs. He seems to be playing a little bit more naturally along the edge than he was a defensive tackle or obviously a linebacker. The Vikings didn't love how that was transitioning for him. Yeah, I guess he's an edge defender, which, I mean, you think about it and you say, well, I mean, he is 250 pounds. It was probably his most natural position. You either had to lose weight to be a linebacker or gain weight to be a defensive tackle. But honestly, you take a look at his workout numbers, you take a look at his size, and he just doesn't scream edge defender. So I can see why the Vikings, first I saw why the Vikings took him. I think he was like leading college football in tackles for loss or something as a defensive tackle for Washington State. But, the conversion to edge is not necessarily natural because of his height and length. And also because he didn't have a phenomenal 3-cone or a phenomenal broad jump or anything like that, traits that typically translate to the edge. And now, that they kind of ran out of edge defenders, they're kind of forced to put him there. Plus he wasn't, holding up against the run at defensive tackle. They found a position for him. So all of them played well. I thought Armon Watts, kind of showed up from time to time. I thought he was a pretty good defensive tackle for them. So yeah, I mean, it was really nice to kind of see that. Fadi Adenabo showed up. I think he got a pair of quarterback hits. It was really nice to see that kind of pressure show up. A lot of blitzing again. That helped a lot when you can kind of guarantee that you're going to get one-on-ones. But for the most part, I thought they did. I mean, and they also bottled up the run game, which for the Bears, I mean, it's a famously bad run game, but still, really good performance. And I mean, a lot of this has to do with just kind of how bad the Bears' offensive line is right now. They're playing kind of like, I guess what Ezra Cleveland was, the backup to the backup at a couple of positions. I mean, they were lucky that Cody Whitehair was healthy for the game, but, Rashad Coward is a guard playing right tackle. I think he's their third tackle option there. Alex Bars is a backup. He's playing. So, it's not a great offensive line, and they've made some pretty bad defensive lines look good. But still, I mean, you still have to beat them, and they did a pretty good job there.
So another thing that we should talk about is that that hit that took out Foles, and it looks like when he went down hard. And my initial thought was, well, something's broken because his arms aren't moving. And they're talking now that
a lot of people thought it was collarbone. Yeah,
I was calling collarbone in the group chat thing, or in the video Zoom call that we did, and it turns out that they are concerned about his knee, or his right hip and his knee. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it seems to be, that they're concerned about the right hip and the knee, or leg, I guess, right hip / leg. They're according to Dan Wearer, they're bracing themselves, quote unquote, bracing themselves for possible news of a season-ending injury. So it sounds like the Bears are expecting the worst and, kind of maybe hoping for the best on this one. We'll find out more later, but yeah, it might be kind of a season-altering injury for them. Not that their season was going very well. They dropped 4 straight. But yeah, that could mean, Mitch Trubisky might come back soon because he was inactive because of injury, because I think was it his right shoulder or something like that. So he might be back soon. But there could be a game or two, or if Trubisky is, arm doesn't heal as quickly as they want it to, 3 or 4, in which case you're talking about meeting the Vikings again, where they have to rely on Tyler Bray or Kyle Sloter.
The man, the myth, the legend.
I mean, talk about a revenge game, right?
Well, this is their bye week now, so they get a little bit of time to get the mash tent out and attempt to heal. But right after they get out of this bye, they go immediately to Green Bay.
Yeah, where they'll meet the Smith brothers, who have not been as good in terms of pressure, but still pretty good, especially against that offensive line.
A primetime Sunday night game against Green Bay at Green Bay.
I forgot they had another primetime game. Yeah. Their next game's a primetime game. Who did this?
There's several questions to be asked when you look at the primetime schedule this year. First off, the number of NFC East games that have been featured this year, it seems more than usual. It's probably not, but it seems like
it's probably not. I think that the NFC East stuff is explainable because they just tend to get the most viewership because, there's so many people that
population centers, markets, and all that. Yeah.
Right. You got a New York team. You've got, America's team, which it's no longer America's team, but still draws, enormous ratings with the Dallas Cowboys. You've got Washington, which still has fans, in the South that decided not to switch over to the Saints, the Falcons, or the Panthers when they were founded. So there's there's a huge market for these teams. I mean, Washington had the largest market and the highest net worth of any football team back in 96, 97. And in fairness, they had won a Super Bowl in 91, right?
Yeah.
But
when Baltimore came in there, it changed everything.
Yeah, no, it really did. It really did. But they still have a huge market in the South. Dallas has a huge market, and New York and Philly. So I think the NFC East stuff is whether or not you knew they were going to be good or bad. And I think that they probably thought Daniel Jones might take a step, and Dak Prescott is good, and Carson Wentz we expect to be good. I think they that kind of, you understand kind of the logic. You get the ratings plus some expectation that they'll improve or be better. I don't know. What were the Bears in 2019? What was their record? I mean, they made the playoffs and got bounced in the but they were were they in 2019? They weren't third in the NFC, were they?
No. They didn't host a home game. They went to
Yeah, right. Yes, they were 8-8. Yeah, that's it. They were 8. So I don't know why you schedule these primetime games for them, because at least the Vikings were 10-6. You could say maybe anticipate that the Vikings would be good.
Trubisky is just that much of a draw.
Right? Yeah, you gotta Gotta get the pretty boy assassin on TV.
Trubisky equals ratings. I'm just that's what they were hoping for. Foles, however, not so much. But yeah, Nick Foles went out on that last drive, and the Bears had a couple of times. We were watching it in the video. The Bears had a few moments there that really seemed to parallel some of the worst Vikings decisions on third down. Like the use of screens on third down, or there was one in particular. It was like 3rd and 5, and they threw to, I believe it was Cordero Patterson, who couldn't have been anywhere, who was nowhere near the line of scrimmage, and just expected him to make that happen. He just sat there like, man, I've watched the Vikings do that way too many times. It's nice to see another team do that. But there was just a lot of weird play calling that happened.
Yeah, I don't know that switching to Bill Lazor was the play calling panacea, the magic bullet that they needed.
I'm not saying Matt Nagy has the answers. I'm just saying that the guy who did call it probably doesn't either.
Yeah, so Lazor was the offensive coordinator. He's got experience with Chip Kelly, but he was the offensive coordinator in Miami, I want to say under Philbin, who was that former Packers coach that became like this. He was on Hard Knocks. He was like the least interesting Hard Knocks coach in the history of Hard Knocks, and they had Mike Smith. So it's saying a lot. But yeah, and then he became the Cincinnati offensive coordinator, and he ranked in the 20s twice, like 22nd and 27th in total points, and in the top 15 once, ranked 11th his first year in Miami. So like it was just not a great record as an offensive coordinator. And they just made him the play caller because obviously the Nagy thing wasn't working, and Nagy wasn't going to fire himself. So yeah, I don't know. It was really poor play calling. They didn't adjust their calls for the fact that the Vikings were blitzing a lot. They weren't doing a lot to throw into blitzes aside, from those screens, which you could say is maybe a response to blitzes, but they really needed to throw into them instead of away from them, like they did on the screens, which I think probably would have done something. Like, if Troy Dye is leaving his coverage to rush the passer, throw it, where Troy Dye was, which, I mean, obviously most defenses are aware of this strategy. It's not a magic strategy or anything like that, but it's a pretty common response, and they never did it. They never had someone throw a hot. They just decided, well, it's 3rd down. The Vikings are probably going to blitz, so we're going to throw a wide receiver screen against, some pretty good tackling corners. Because, I mean, the Vikings now, again, have some pretty good tackling corners, and throwing some screens to them, aside from, that first screen that worked out. No, that first screen actually it sucked. Was it Anthony Miller got thrown into Darnell Mooney, right? That was pretty interesting. Yeah, there was like one screen that worked out well, and then the rest just kind of fell flat. Allen Robinson screens even. Like, Allen Robinson is a great receiver, right? He's like a top 8 receiver in the NFL, I think. The one thing I'm not going to have him do all that often are screens. So I don't know what they're doing.
I felt so bad for him at some point during the game. Just like, dude, you really need to find your way out of this, out of here. If, barring some sort of miracle, do you think Matt Nagy is out at the end of this year?
Yeah, it would definitely take a miracle. I think he's out. Yeah. The only reason that he wouldn't be, and it's actually a reason I'm kind of sympathetic to, is that he actually didn't choose Mitch Trubisky. Trubisky was drafted the year before he arrived. And so if you're the Bears ownership and you believe in him, which I don't know that you would say, hey, this is just a really strong defense. We want to keep this unit around. You can win with it, but you just need a good offense to go with it. We're kind of pot committed to some of these contracts, like the Khalil Mack contract. I think they're kind of committed to the Akeem Hicks contract, if I remember. And they just signed Kyle Fuller to a long-term deal, and they've got Roquan Smith that they're about to, offer a 5th-year option to. It's kind of hard to sell a player on a long-term contract if you're firing the coach. So the argument probably would be, we've got a good defense. We've got to take advantage of it when we can, which is like the Vikings argument, right? So we're going to keep the head coach, but give him the quarterback that he wants for once. And, if Nagy was a big part of the Nick Foles decision, maybe he did get the quarterback he wants, but, let him draft a quarterback. Although that's going to be hard now, right? Because they won their first 5 games, or 5 of their first 6 games, right? The morons, you're supposed to win the last 8 games, like the Vikings are going to try to.
Clearly, the Vikings had the better strategy here.
Yeah, obviously. Um, but yeah, they might have played themselves out of the ability to select a quarterback. So we'll see. But yeah, I think that would be the only argument. But I think that you still want to evaluate Nagy on kind of like what he's been able to do, right? Like if if you give a cook awful ingredients and he cooks you a meal and it tastes bad, you're not surprised. But if it tastes worse than the sum of its parts, you're like, this is probably a bad cook. Like, I think that's what's happening here, right? Like, yeah, you may have given them green onions that were a week old or something, but like, they're edible. You can make something. This is not what happened here. Like, David Montgomery is, I think, second. Well, they didn't have him for this game, but just, to think about it, David Montgomery is second in the league in forced missed tackles. First is Dalvin Cook. A lot of those missed tackles are happening behind the line of scrimmage, but you're telling me you cannot design a run game that simply cannot get yards with somebody who's consistently breaking tackles, because that's how bad the offensive line is. And it is really bad. James Daniels out for the season. They don't have a right tackle. They've dealt with multiple injuries. They missed Cody Whitehair for much of the season. It's a bad offensive line, right? But I mean, the Vikings have had a pretty bad offensive line for a couple of years, and they've been able to generate a better run game. Is it all because Jordan Howard's bad or David Montgomery is bad? Maybe. But like, you've got a mobile quarterback. You can't move him around in the pocket. You can't get just a couple more yards from Mitch Trubisky. I don't know. It's not a ton of skill on offense, right? It's mostly Allen Robinson and now Darnell Mooney, but you should be able to get more than you're getting.
Just not very good, I think, is the best way you can describe this Bears team overall. Just not very good.
Yeah, one could say they're not perfect. Yeah.
Like, we're past the paper tiger situation. We're past, you know.
Wow. Did I write the best article ever on that? Holy crap. If you'll allow me to toot my own horn. And you will, because I just talk over you if you don't.
Well.
But, man, I feel really good about that Chicago Bears are not for real piece that I got absolutely 87 comments, most of which are angry at me.
And it was funny, that week is when it all went to hell for them. So
yeah, it started their 4-game losing streak. Incredible. Which I guess the Bills had like a 3-game losing streak after I wrote about them being good. So who knows?
Yeah, this you might actually be the kiss of death here. We'll have to look at that later.
Yeah, who do I get to write about next? Maybe the LA Rams? I don't know.
Yeah, but what we should talk about is that missed extra point that Yahoo doesn't consider a miss.
Because the kicker never touched the ball. Britton Colquitt attempts to throw. Of course, it's not a miss.
What a weird play. The special teams, and it was said by someone in the chat. It was like the special teams of the Bears were like, "Did a whistle get called or something? Why is nothing? Oh, he's throwing the ball. That'll go well." Like, the Bears almost wanted to give them a do-over. As far as that play was concerned, the Bears weren't in any hurry to try to block it. The Bears were just confused by the horrible snap.
Yeah, well, I think, oh man, I totally remembered who it was that got there. Now I forgot. But, whoever got there in time, quote unquote, in time for the block was just like, look, if I run into these pansies, I'm going to get a penalty of some kind. I'm not going to lose a snap because, there's special protections for specialists or whatever. So I'm just going to stand in front of whatever this kick is going to be, and I'll be fine. We'll all be fine. And both Britton Colquitt and Dan Bailey were like, yeah, I don't want to kick into this. Are you kidding me? and so Dan Bailey pulls up. Britton Colquitt immediately senses what's going on. He gets up and he's like, okay, yeah, well, at this point in the play, somebody's got to realize they have to run a route. So I'm just throwing it. And he threw it one way and Rudolph ran the other way, which, fine, whatever. That play was lost. I'm not going to get too mad at
No one's going to fault him. Yeah, no one's going to fault him for not hitting Rudolph there, although it would have been hilarious. It
would have been so funny if they turned it into 2.
If Rudolph caught it and was like, hey, I'm just as surprised as you guys are.
Yeah, no, we planned the bad snap.
Oh, yeah. The Austin Cutting had nothing to do with this not working. Austin Cutting is just a genius. He knew exactly when we needed to go for 2 here.
Yeah, we knew that if we got a bad snap off, that they would think that they needed to rush the pocket and block the kick. And so we knew there wouldn't be anybody in coverage. That's definitely what happened.
What a weird, yeah, it was almost, did like a whistle get called? Like what? Like it was almost like the Bears player stopped.
I honestly think he was just like, I'm not going to screw this up. This play is done for. I'm not going to screw it up by getting a penalty by running into a protected position. I think that's what he was thinking.
It's a bit like the Minneapolis Miracle thing where the corner was like, I can't touch him this early. I'm going to get called for PI. And then he knocks out his own player. It's like,
right.
I can't touch Stephon Diggs here. I'm going to get called, and they're going to a game can't end on a penalty.
And then they'll get a free play. I'd rather he just go out of bounds.
Exactly. Or, run the rest of the 40 yards in for the touchdown. Oh, crap. Yeah, what a weird... Yeah. So this is another long snapper problem with Austin Cutting, or another problem with a long snap from Austin Cutting. And this is a couple of weeks in a row now where this is... The special teams have had a number of problems.
Yeah, I think it's 3 games in a row, I want to say, where the long snapping hasn't been all there. And I don't want to say it was perfect before then. Not that, PFF grades are the end-all be-all, and we tend to cite them on the show when it's a little bit more convenient for us to talk about it, or when we disagree and we think it's an interesting talking point. But... not a ton of people do long snapper stuff. They have some like super enthusiastic special teams guys. Shout out Gordon McGinnis. And Austin Cutting is the worst rated long snapper by a healthy margin in PFF grades. And for you to play bad enough that the PFF grades have noticed you, first of all, is like an issue, right? But second, I think it's pretty bad when Mike Zimmer refuses to answer questions about him, but still acknowledges that he's playing poorly, right? Because I asked him, hey, so certainly seems like Austin Cutting isn't playing very well. Is that the case? And why is it the case? And he just goes, sometimes he's pretty good and sometimes he hasn't been good lately. Oh, okay.
I feel like Zimmer has been watching the players that you hate on an NFL team from Bomani and Jones, and he wants to include a new person on there, which is the long snapper who's not good at his job, but you can't replace him mid-season because there's no long snappers.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. The Vikings worked out, I think they only worked out, they worked out 2 long snappers, right? They worked out Steve Wortell a couple days ago, and they worked out another long snapper the other day. They worked out 2 long snappers along with 2 place kickers and a punter. So it's very clearly on their mind. Obviously, they worked out the place kickers because they lost Chase McLaughlin, which, I don't know how I feel about that, because, Dan Bailey's playing well, but he's also, expensive and older, and so they were clearly, quote-unquote, grooming Chase McLaughlin to be the next kicker. To the extent that you can do that, but expanded practice squads, right? But that's part of it. But yeah, I don't know. I think Steve Wortell was a Senior Bowl invite at long snapper too, so it's very clear that among the potential replacement long snappers that exist out there, he's probably one of the best. But yeah, I asked Zimmer hey, why is the long snapping so bad? Because I wanted an answer that was just he's got a cut on his finger or something like that. Something where it's just oh, okay. It's not you spent a 7th round pick to save $200,000 in cap space against a long snapper that was good despite the fact that he didn't have a finger, half a finger. It's that this one is currently injured, but you can't really do much about it. I get it. Everything makes sense. You didn't waste a pick. These things just happen. But no, it's just I don't know. He's bad.
That is a pretty rough assessment. It's accurate.
Yeah. And he's I guess we're gonna have to get more reps in or something. And I was great. He just does not want to talk about special teams.
Yeah, special teams and the Vikings did not go well together this particular game. Not to mention the 104-yard kick return that Cordero Patterson had to start off the second half, which once that it was announced that he now tied for the NFL record with 8 total, my only thought was, oh, well, the Vikings will score, and then he'll just bring one over to to break the record, because it's an incredibly Vikings thing to have dumb records like that broken on them. Like, I don't know of any team that has had more kick returns or punt returns brought back on them than the Vikings in Chicago.
Yes. Well, so I think it's true that since 2002, the Vikings have allowed more kick returns in Chicago than any other team has, period. I want to say that's true. I think I looked that up and that was the case. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes looking that up while I talk about this. So the kick return was like really classic Cordero Patterson, right? So one of the things that he does on kick returns that I don't know that a ton of other kick returners do, even good ones like I think Josh Cribbs does this, but I don't think like Percy Harvin, for example, did this, or I don't want to say Devin Hester because he's an average kick returner but an elite punt returner, right? But I want to say that he like presses the lane like a running back, which I think is like wild to me that you can do that. So what that means is, and this actually was what Dalvin Cook was actually doing a pretty good job of the prior game, is when you essentially fake going for one lane, and you bait people into that lane, and then you obviously you cut to another lane that you expect to be open based off of what you did. So yeah, that's all it is. But you can't really do that on kick returns because they tend to keep lane discipline first, and second, the angles are kind of wrong, and people have time to make up for any mistakes that they make and hop back into their lane. So he kind of did that, and he forced two Vikings defenders who were being blocked this way. It's not as if they just made the wrong decision, but he forced two Vikings defenders to kind of swap lanes, and they were blocked into swapping lanes, and so he did that, and then he cut back inside through them because they were heading in opposite directions, and from there that was it. Like Dan Bailey was the only defender there left, so that was pretty much a touchdown. He gets around Dan Bailey, and that's it. Okay, return touchdown. So I'm taking a look. This includes interceptions, fumbles, punts, kickoffs. So including tonight, it's one kickoff return touchdown and two punt return touchdowns, as well as a couple of interception and like I think there's a field goal return in here too. Jesus Christ, the Viking special teams have been bad.
It's one of those stats that you could like say on the internet, like if you just read it without seeing it cited, you go, yeah, that seems accurate, without like looking up any sort of information as to whether or not it is. Like it seems right.
Right. Yeah. It's oh, I can search by opponent kick return touchdown too. Yeah, so they've allowed 4 special teams return touchdowns since 2002. And if I look for cumulative multi-season games matching criteria, and maybe a 5th. Yeah, so 4 in Soldier Field alone ranks 18th, so it's not as interesting. But man, they've been just brutal in special teams at Soldier Field. So yeah, when they announced that he had 8, which was the record, I absolutely expected that they would get that next one, and I also expected, like, every time Cordell Patterson scored a return touchdown for the Vikings, the other team was just like, well, I mean, screw this, we're just not going to kick to him. That's dumb. Why were we doing that in the first place? Which, hey, good question. But I figured that the Vikings would kick short, but I mean, the Bears have really good special teams coaching, which I think we saw. There was some pretty good blocking on that return. They played just the right side of not getting blocks in the back when they were blocking to the side. But the Bears were like, well, look, I know that you're probably going to try and do this, so we're just gonna have Cordell Patterson be ready to return the up kick and have our up men 5 yards further up, and so that they were able to have a kick returned all the way to the 35 on the next kickoff return. Luckily, the Vikings didn't score too much after that, so you don't have to worry about that.
less potential sample size on that. Yeah.
Yeah, they got saved there.
Yeah, let's go with that. Is there anything else that we're missing as far as the game is concerned before we hit the mailbag?
Not really. You talked a little bit about how good that defensive line performance was, and I just kind of wanted to emphasize that was really great.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Joe, who asks, "What was the biggest factor in the team winning the game, or winning games? The right guard position, Zimmer play calling, or Dalvin?"
Is Zimmer play calling like a reference to what's happening on offense too? Yeah, I would say it's probably not the right guard position. I would say I'd say probably the third down defense is really phenomenal, which is Zimmer play calling. He just did a really great job, and it's very clear that it's tailored to quarterback at this point. I think that the amount of times that they decide to blitz, the amount of times they decide to attack a guard or attack a center with the double A or double B looks, or I shouldn't say double B, but like either B or A gap with the linebackers or double A gap with the linebackers. It's very clear that they tailor each blitz package every week to the opponent, and they do a good job of that. And then they decide whether or not to blitz, also based off of the opponent, because I've mentioned this before. They don't blitz quarterbacks on third down that tend to be good against the blitz, but they do blitz those quarterbacks that tend to get a little bit worse. And Foles is one of those. So, really phenomenal defensive play calling. The right guard position. I don't think Ezra Cleveland, and I'm going to want to watch this again, but I don't think Ezra Cleveland played like a really remarkable game or anything. Like he gave up a pressure on the second play, right? And then he got like beat up in the run game before Akeem Hicks got out. So he probably played better than Elflein would have. And he definitely played better, I think, than Samia would have. But yeah, Dalvin was like nice after Akeem Hicks got hurt, but before that was not doing a ton.
Next question is going to be from Taylor, who asks, "Do I like Kirk Cousins now?"
Probably not. I mean, I've always defended him, right? Like I've always said he's not fundamentally a bad quarterback. He's just got, that thing that bothers you, right? To reference Bomani and Jones, he's just the quarterback with that thing, and that thing is stupid stuff. He's got the Tony Romo in him, I guess. But I mean, probably not. He played well, but is he going to do it again in a high leverage situation? I don't know. We'll see. I think if you have to ask the question, you're looking for reasons not to like him, and I promise you that you'll find them.
Yeah. Bob Marks asks, "Why wasn't that play where Foles got injured an intentional grounding penalty? It's not enough that he got hurt and potentially hurt for the season."
I love the savageness of this question. Hey, career-ending injury, whatever. Penalty's a penalty. Throw the flag.
Yeah. Just that is pure like it's not enough that you won. You want to run up the score. I get it, but
hey, if they had gotten a safety in that game, that would have felt probably pretty good. and a penalty along with that, that might have put you in position to get a safety, right? No, yeah. So I looked at that play again, and I don't know if Bob, if you had tweeted this at me or had asked in the app, but I had another person tweet at me and another person ask me in the Athletic app, like, "Hey, why wasn't this an intentional grounding penalty?" And my initial reaction was, yeah, probably because the refs aren't heartless. And I thought about that, and there's no way that's true. I've seen refs before.
Yes, that is. But if we're going to attribute feelings to these zebras, then we're going to start having some real problems.
Right? Yeah. Can't humanize them. That's the road to ruin. But I watched it again, and first, they don't really call intentional grounding when your throwing motion is altered by a player, and that's clearly what happened here. But second, Ryan Nall was, I think, approximately enough in the area where you can start using your judgment and be like, well, I'm not going to call intentional grounding on this play, this poor dude. No, Ryan Nall was close enough that I would argue it's not. But I think it doesn't matter because once a defender alters the course of the quarterback's throw, it doesn't really matter.
I'd be curious on a stat deep dive on refs calling penalties when the quarterback is clearly throwing for his life. Like he's just trying to get as away from a defender. Just get away. Although the first instance of that I can think of is the Jared Allen Dan Orlovsky thing. There was definitely a penalty thrown on that. Chris,
I was thinking of the Tom Brady safety on the intentional grounding that he took in the Super Bowl. I was like, was he?
yeah, that was a thing. I remember that.
They won that game, right? That was just like the worst way to start. They ended up winning that game.
Yeah, that was fairly brutal. Chris asks, who has more value to their respective team, Kyle Rudolph or Cordero Patterson? And if you could trade the two, would you?
This is such a wild question. I don't know the answer to this, honestly. Because like you have like the last Mohican, right? You've got the one kick returner that exists, right? That this seems to me like having immeasurable value. Before 2 weeks ago, I think the Bears were leading in field position after kickoffs. The Vikings, until Cordell Patterson walked in free agency, the Vikings were on this insane run. When did he leave in free agency? Like 2017? Is that it? Must be 2018. The 2018 offseason. So then the Vikings had to look for a kick returner for 2 years. Either way, so from 2009 to 2017 or 2009 to 2018, it must have been 2017. The Vikings every single year led the league in field position after kickoff. So obviously the first at Percy Harvin and then Cordell Patterson. And to some extent, you must think, well, the common thread here is Vikings, right? They got rid of the best kick returner in the game, Percy Harvin, and they got a new one, and suddenly they've got a new best kick returner in the game. But the thing is, I mean, the Vikings went through three special teams coaches in that time, and I think it's two, and they still did all right. And second, Percy Harvin and Cordell Patterson have been elite kick returners elsewhere. Percy Harvin not for very long, but Cordell Patterson for sure. And so it's pretty clear that that's what they did. The fact that the Vikings led every single year in what is typically a somewhat random stat is nuts to me. Cordell Patterson also obviously like leads the league in kickoff return average and has forever. I think since he joined the league, I think there's only been 1 year where he hasn't led the league in yards. I don't love kickoff return average because if you, like Cordell does, return a kick from deep in the end zone to the 20-yard line, that gets recorded as a 29-yard kickoff return, and that's typically more than the average kick return, which I think is 27 yards. And so you've hurt the team, but you've helped your average usually. So I don't love that stat, but given that kickoff field position after kickoffs is a very difficult stat to get and find and replicate really quickly, that's the best tool we have, and he is by far the best at it. So let's say on average you get 8 yards, right? So from the 25 to the 32. After every single kickoff, either because, and this is why that stat became important, is because later in his Vikings career, they kicked away from him. And they were like, yeah, just have Zach Line or whoever do it. That cannot possibly be worse than Cordell Patterson. And they were right. It was not worse, but they still returned kicks to like the 30. And this was before the average was at the 25. And so he just really altered field position just by his very presence. And so if you get like an extra 8 yards on average, every time they score, so every field goal, every touchdown, every time they score, and let's say, you've got a good defense, right? And how good your kickoff return game is, the value of that is dependent on how good your defense is, because if you prevent them from scoring, it doesn't really matter. But let's say they've got, 4 scores in a game because you're playing pretty good defense. So like, 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals. That's like, 20 points? That's better than the NFL average of 24 or 23. So you've got a pretty good defense. So they've only scored 4 times. Plus, you've got the 5th kickoff return because of the halftime or the opening kickoff. That is about 40 additional yards of offense that you get from that with explosiveness. Now you compare that to Kyle Rudolph, who is not averaging 40 yards a game, but has improved as a blocker this year. I think it's Cordero Patterson. I think I would talk myself into that. Plus, I think you've got more capacity for explosiveness, right? It's also very easy to make this argument after like Kyle Rudolph's only fumble loss. You're like, well, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think Kyle Rudolph is more replaceable, right? Because it's not as if you get rid of Kyle Rudolph, and if he is averaging 40 yards a game, suddenly you're just 40 yards a game behind. Now you've got your backup tight end. He's way more replaceable. Like, you go from Cordero Patterson to KJ Wright, or not KJ Wright, sorry. God damn, why am I thinking of the Seahawks linebacker? Whoever returns kicks for the Vikings. KJ Osborne, that's it.
I have theories as to why you were thinking about
yeah,
that.
I know. I stow it.
Just own it. Just own it.
But yeah, you go from Cordell Patterson to KJ Osborne, who also has a propensity to return it in like baffling situations. And you go from like the 30-yard line to like the 22-yard line. And that's brutal. Like, now you're just better kneeling it out. But yeah, the replacement level of Cordero Patterson is kneeling every time, and so returning it to the 25. The replacement level for Kyle Rudolph is Tyler Conklin, who wasn't bad in this game. And, if he's your top tight end, you're not happy about it, but you could probably squeeze 30 yards a game out of him. Maybe 30 is a bit much, but like, you're fine, right? So you're not losing 40, right? So I think it's Cordero Patterson, which is weird. So I guess I would trade them straight up.
Just as a correction, between something you had mentioned earlier, the game where Brady started a Super Bowl off with an intentional grounding safety, that was one of the Giants' Super Bowl losses.
Oh, so he lost that game.
That was the second one, actually.
Oh, so he definitely lost that game.
Yes.
That wasn't even like the David Tyree, Mario Manningham miracle game. All right.
No, that's about as random a situation as they find themselves in. Let's go to Chris Murphy, who asks, please explain the ESPN graphic. You know the one. Now, you should have been more specific here, because I thought you were talking about the Office Space one, whereas Arif is convinced you're talking about the bear picnic one, right?
Yeah, there's no way you're talking about the Office Space one, because that doesn't need explanation. That's just dope. Now, James's argument here is that someone on the Zoom call did need it explained to them, but I think that most people would recognize that this one was objectively baffling, whereas the Office Space one is not. So that's my explanation for why this one needs an explanation. I do not have an explanation.
It was just odd. I don't know.
Yeah.
And the broadcast did nothing to explain it.
They were just saying, Kirk Cousins is 0-3 against the Bears. Dalvin Cook only gets 30 rush yards a game, and Adam Thielen only has 2 touchdowns in 12 career games a game. They were reading off the PowerPoint slide without recognizing that there were like dancing monkeys on the PowerPoint. Like, Jesus. But yeah, so for anyone who missed it, congratulations, first of all. But second, I'll GIF it and put it in the show notes. But brief description, I guess they're camping in the woods, and what are they, on a bear stand or something?
I assume they were afraid of bears.
Well, yeah, so they're clearly afraid of bears, and they're like cowering and hiding from bears, and one bear walks across the screen through the campsite where there's clearly like a bonfire that hasn't been lit. There's also like a football underneath the bear stand. I don't know. But the most baffling part, like that, I guess all makes sense, but they're all backpacking, which I guess, again, I suppose that makes sense because you're camping, but every one of their backpacks has like a weird, I don't know, is it a pipe or a bicycle pump or just a really poorly rendered golf club, as well as trumpets. And I don't get why there are trumpets on them.
It could be something as simple as a bear bell, which is actually a thing that people use for camping. So
right, but they clearly wouldn't have one because they haven't been able to foist off bears, and they don't look like trumpets.
No, there's a lot of questions going on here, and I don't have a good explanation as to what that was. It just seemed
someone suggested odd. Like maybe they misinterpreted what a Gjallarhorn was, which I don't know. I guess someone else is like,
"Boy, you better been doing your calisthenics if you're going to stretch that much, son."
Well, I mean, a couple of people responded, and somebody was like, "Well, they're musketeers, and I was like, that doesn't explain anything at all to me.
That actually raises
What?
more questions.
Right? Wouldn't they have muskets then? That seems like fairly like, yeah, okay, 3 musketeers that are afraid of bears, fine. Those two things don't go together, and they're camping. But okay, I get it. There's 3 of them. They're musketeers. And then someone else said, I forget what it was. Oh yeah, it's some play on the fact that real Vikings didn't have horns, which also I think is just an enormous stretch. Like, there's no way.
No, holy mixed metaphors, Batman. We're at that point. Just like,
yeah. So no,
sure.
I cannot explain this, and the broadcast refused to.
Yeah, that when the broadcast just ignores your graphic, you went in the wrong direction.
Yeah, the other graphics were phenomenal too. This was some of the best graphical like CG game that I've seen Monday Night Football put together. And that includes like the Andy Reid looking through his office of clipboards or whatever, which was amazing.
Yes.
But like the teddy bears with the awful offense, and then Kirk Cousins with Joe Namath and Archie Manning, the Office Space thing where they've got like the mug with Monday Night Football tech instead of, was it I&I tech? Initech? Yeah, Initech.
Initech.
And they've got the red swing line stapler. And then Archie Manning is wearing the Aints bag that they wore to Saints games back when he was the quarterback for the Saints. Like, holy crap. Incredible.
Yeah, I appreciated that on multiple levels there, but that was interesting. Raul asks, who is best at their job? Chisna at gunner, Cutting at snapper, or JDF at offensive coordinator?
I guess it's Chisna at gunner because I've never heard of a boom bust gunner, but there it is. He has, I think he's +1 on penalties. So I think he's induced 1 more penalty than he's caused. So that's net good. He absolutely did not need to do what he did today in terms of the touchback. I don't get it, but so that's 20 yards lost there. Or I guess like 18, right? Because if he had just tapped it I don't know, but whatever. It's 20 yards lost. Which really screws Colquitt's stats, right? Like, that was a pretty good punt. He's probably net negative as a gunner, but we're asking about 3 net negatives at the moment, and you can't really have a boom bust long snapper. It's just bust, and right now he's busting, right? And JDF was not an explosive. Like, the one thing he was good at was the fact that he'd call more passing plays, but then they'd all be like Dalvin Cook is running like a 3-yard stick route, and it turns out a year later we find out he's actually one of the best deep ball receivers in the league. Like, what are you doing, dude? So he threw the ball a lot. That was great. But that's it. Like, he just couldn't design good plays. And I did some math where I started off with the assumption that Pro Football Focus grades were not impacted that much by the offensive coordinator, which is obviously not true. But for the purposes of this test was fine, I think. Where I created an expected offensive points generated per drive by Pro Football Focus score, and the correlation was pretty high, which probably tells me that assumption is not true, right? That your offensive coordinator probably does impact what PFF grades you get. But the biggest differences will probably tell you who the worst offensive coordinators are, because you've got guys that are performing largely like objectively well at positions that matter, then and you're not scoring points. Either there's some weird turnover luck that's happening, or you're a bad offensive coordinator. And he ranked as like one of the worst since like 2006. So I guess it's Chisna gunner because there's a chance of positive plays there.
Fun fact for our listeners, John DeFilippo is currently the quarterback's coach for the Bears.
Oh my God.
I had to look that up myself. Right. I looked it up and I looked at the...
I've forgotten that 4 times already.
I looked that up on Wikipedia and went, all right, let me just check the Bears website quick, just because that seems like it's too weird. Nope, he is the quarterback coach of the Bears this year.
Holy crap, dude.
Yeah.
Man, that career went south fast, right? Like, he's the quarterback's coach plus red zone coordinator for the 2017 Eagles that put together, I guess, an MVP level performance from the quarterback position, and then they won a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. And he's the next hot name, and he goes from organizing one of the most underperforming offenses, in a decade plus, to essentially getting kind of mutinied out of his position in Jacksonville to being a quarterback's coach for a team that has not one but two quarterback crises.
Yeah, that's rough. That's not a situation that you would be proud of. Yeah, he got shot out of a cannon in Minnesota, found himself in Jacksonville, got mutinied in Jacksonville, and then found himself in Chicago. That's that's rough.
I think this is like part of the thing with Zimmer and offensive coordinators that, like, if you go through them individually, you can't blame him too much, right? Like, you can't blame him for the fact that Shermer left for a better job, or the fact that that Stefanski left for a better job, right? So that doesn't count against Zimmer. And then, like, you look at the balance of DeFilippo's career, and you got to be like, oh, it was clearly the right move to fire this guy. Like, yeah, Zimmer, like, it's not that he can't get along with offensive coordinators, it's that this guy sucked. And so, like, three of the five, like, vacancies have been totally justified. And the other one is, like, Norv Turner, who, like, technically he resigned, but,
I like
it's
how
probably right to get rid of him.
Panthers fans were, like, excited to get Norv Turner there, and the Vikings fans were like, really?
Yeah, hold your horses. Yeah. And they were pretty excited for the first couple of weeks, too. They're like, this Norv Turner thing's working out. And then it didn't.
No, it did not. You could have watched any Vikings game after that point. Nope, you didn't. John Belk asks, you're given the ability to trade for a magical Norse axe that transfers second and short, second and long, and the end of half play calling to the analytics staffer of your choice. How high a draft pick would you be willing to spend?
God, this is such a good question. So, presumably the analytics staffer either is like a lot of the analytics staffers in the NFL and in college that actually know playbooks like really well and are football people as well as math people, or they're an analytics staffer that is much more versed in the data and not that familiar with playbooks, and so they would tell you the essential strategy, but then let the play caller choose it. So you'd say at the end of halves, they would say, a pass play that goes intermediate to deep primarily, and then they would find somewhere in their playbook, a 1-2 read that goes intermediate to deep with a dump down option, right? So that's your choice, right? Then I would probably trade a second round pick for that. Like, which I know is super high. I don't think I'd be willing to trade like a first round pick, right? Because you take a look at the Vikings first round picks, which have not been like amazing, but they've not been awful, right? You go, Teddy and Anthony and Trey Waynes and Laquan Treadwell and Cordero Patterson, Xavier Rhodes. It goes back to 2013, but and Sharif Floyd and obviously Justin Jefferson and Jeff Gladney, and you think some of these guys didn't work out. I think I'm missing one, like, really important one. But, some of these guys didn't work out. But for the most part, they're good enough players that you wouldn't say a small play calling advantage, which it is infuriating, but it is a relatively small play calling advantage that generates a couple of expected points here or there. But then you take a look at the second round picks. So, before the Zimmer era, that includes, Kyle Rudolph, but, after the Zimmer era, also includes like Dalvin Cook. I guess you could say it includes Yannick Ngakoue for this year. Who else have they picked? Eric Kendricks, so that's one you wouldn't have wanted to let go of. But Mackenzie Alexander. But for the most part, they're players that are definitely useful to have. Brian O'Neill, you wouldn't want that to get rid of that. Useful to have, but for the most part, second round picks have just not been as explosive as your first round picks, and then you can start kind of negotiating. I certainly would trade more than a third round pick. You're giving up Danielle Hunter, but you're also like giving up Jerick McKinnon, who I was a huge fan of, but he's a running back that didn't pan out, so that's like not great. Or like Alexander Madison, or something along those lines. And yeah, I'd trade more than a third round pick. So I guess a second round pick. And I think the kind of advantage that you get from expected points from more efficient play calling in those situations, and therefore real points, is probably worth more than a second round player. But I'm definitely not giving up that first round pick. Maybe a third and some change is maybe where it really is, like a third and a fifth or something like that.
Really going stingy on the magical item there.
Well, I mean, all it does is it transfers the play calling responsibility. It doesn't like chop down a forest in one swing, right? Like it's magical, but like the magical capability is like really limited to this hyper specific thing.
Yeah, you need a pretty good reflex save to do anything else. Yeah. Hey, look at me with the D&D reference. All right, next. I'm almost proud of that. Jack asks, why does Kirk, when the pocket is breaking down, always run to his left where there is seemingly more pressure and he has to turn his body around to throw?
Yeah, I was kind of curious about this question because I remember him rolling to the right a lot, but I think a lot of those are undesigned plays. So it's not as if, it's the same thing with the pocket breaking down. I kind of want to evaluate this more to see if he's consistently rolling to his left under pressure and rolling right on designed plays. So I don't know if it's the case that for a fact he does. Obviously, in this game he did, like into pressure too. I would say it doesn't make sense that he does that if that is in fact a tendency that he has, because you're right, he has to turn his body around to throw because he's a right-handed quarterback, and his mechanics on the run to the right are actually really good, which is like not surprising, but like not something you'd expect because you'd think a quarterback that's good throwing on the run is good at running, and he's not. But yeah, his mechanics throwing to the left are like up and down, and he's talked about this before, where throwing to the right, it's really easy to get his shoulder square, and get the motion down so that he throws in stride. Whereas running to his left, he has to, like you said, flip his hips and get his shoulder square in a way that he doesn't to his right because he doesn't keep his whole body parallel to the line of scrimmage. So I don't know why, but I suspect it's because he can see pressure to the right a little bit better than he does to the left. The old blindside thing. But I would have to verify that that's something he does more often.
What was interesting is this particular game, he had a moment where things broke down to the right, and he ended up scrambling left, away from the defenders, was able to scramble for about 15 yards, and then ended up getting called back due to a hold.
It was called back.
It's just like...
every positive play on the ground, it was just like, all right, okay. And it was always holding on like the tight end, right? Like it wasn't even like, Riley Reef, you rascal. No, it was like, why did they call that on Kyle Rudolph? Or wait, what is Tyler Conklin doing on Khalil Mack anyway?
Irv Smith, I thought he was out this week. How the hell did he get
how did he get a holding penalty? What?
None of this makes sense at all. Why'd they call 84? New York Vikings fan asks, does this game make a case for Jefferson being moved up to the number one position? Or is he most productive in the role he's assigned to as of now?
Yeah, so I read in the mailbag that I don't know that the Vikings really have a number one receiver, right? So for a lot of offenses, coaches will still think in terms of X and Z receivers, even though the roles have become significantly more diverse. And the Vikings have been very open about saying, hey, we have our receivers learn all three positions, the X, the Z, and the slot. And the difference there is that your X receiver, especially in like 90s offenses, were like your classic big and fast split ends that were lined up on the line of scrimmage. They had to deal with press coverage a lot more often. Your Z was your flanker. They were off the line of scrimmage. They didn't have to deal with press coverage as often. They would motion a lot more, and so they were your motion guys. So usually you'd want a quicker guy or something like that. But now they all play all the positions. And the Vikings don't play right-hand, left-hand receiver like you do in high school, or sometimes you see in the NFL, but more often see in college and high school. It's really, they'll both play X, they'll both play Z. Thielen played a lot of Z, coming up, and then started playing X. Diggs played a lot of Z, but is very good at playing X. I don't think it matters. I don't think when they call the plays, more often than not, if you've got a number one receiver, that'll be first in the progression or something like that. If there is a progression, some plays don't have progressions built into them. They're just really built to kind of read the defense and then go where your defensive keys tell you. I don't know that it matters too much. I think they just build an offense, and having good receivers helps. So, would they move someone up or down? It kind of depends on what that would mean in terms of their capacity. But the Vikings offense is certainly more efficient, I think, with the way it's running right now. Like, I don't think switching their roles would lead to necessarily more yardage unless it really did change the progression order and they put, Jefferson in a situation where he's consistently the first in the progression, in which case it would get more efficient. But like, it is hard for me to imagine that a guy that is potentially on the way to set rookie records for receiving would need to get more efficient. It's more likely than not than whatever role that he's occupying right now is ideal for him. So I would say it doesn't matter, but if it did matter, I wouldn't kind of mess with this right now.
Andrew Shad asks, is our defense good now? This probably won't be answerable until a deeper film dive, but how in the hell is this happening with a Denny's overnight shift, with the Denny's overnight shift in the secondary right now?
Yeah, again, Chris Jones, like what? Who is this guy? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say we probably can't know until they play not the Bears. And it's not as if the Lions offense was like killing people. Like, I have a ton of respect for Stafford, but that offense is just not that good. And I guess they did all right against the Packers. But yeah, I would need another game against a good offense. I guess they didn't do too bad against the Seahawks now that I think about it. So maybe there might be something there. But yeah, one more game against a good offense would be nice to kind of figure this out. But yeah, we asked Mike Zimmer about it after the game. We were like, what the hell? Who are these guys? Why are you good? Different wording, but
no, let's be honest.
But he said, and Harrison Smith said much the same thing, that they've matured, and not in the sense that like they've emotionally matured, but that they've got like an understanding of the defense in a way they didn't have before. Like, and this is something Zimmer said during the week as well. When your defense knows the plays, that's like one thing. They'll execute the plays, but they won't necessarily know why, right? And so if there needs to be an adjustment made, they don't know necessarily what help they'll have or kind of where the pressure will be coming from or kind of where the pressure is vacated from or anything like that. But if you know the defense and you know why the plays that are being called, you know what adjustments you need to make. Communication is a lot smoother when, say they motion and you have to make an adjustment. Kind of where you need to float your zones based off of leverage, kind of why you're leveraged the way you are so that you don't make a mistake. If you, if like, say you see a receiver split outside the numbers, that person's probably going to break inside. But as a corner. And so a lot of times you'll try and push them off into the sideline, make them an ineligible receiver if they're split wide enough. And so you'll, line up on the inside of that receiver or something like that. And maybe that's the right call most of the time, but maybe they called a defense where you actually have a ton of inside help, right? There's a linebacker that's going to be floating over into the flat. There's a safety on top. You probably want to push him inside where you're going to get a 2-on-1 versus a 1-on-1 on the outside. And because the way the defense was called or where the pressure is coming from, that you can do that because you're going to have a lot of help on the inside. And so you can kind of give up the slant because they'll be running into Eric Hendricks or something. And so that's maybe knowing the defense a little bit better. That's a pretty crude, not great example, but it helps, right? And so that might be the difference, right? Knowing, when you need to line up off, when you need to line up press, because the Vikings corners have a lot of latitude in that way. What you need to do based off of the down and distance, why you're doing what you're doing. So he's saying that they're getting a lot of that now. Whereas before, they were executing the plays that were called, but they didn't, really have an understanding of the defense. So they would make these mistakes that wouldn't, take that into account. So that's part of the reason. I think part of the reason is that the defense is simpler. They're not making them, a couple episodes ago, I described kind of a lot of the different choices that a defensive back might have to make when there's like a couple of receivers and one of them breaks inside, one of them breaks outside or whatever. Now it's a lot more probably, I don't know, but if they're simplifying the defense, it's probably a lot more spot dropping, or you'll have the outside receiver no matter what, or you have the deep receiver no matter what. Instead of, if this one does this, you do this. If this one does this, you do this. If this one does this, you do this. Unless this happens, then you do this, right? Now there's probably a lot less of that. And there's a lot more short coverage for the corners. You've got the two safeties on top. You've got a lot more cover two. That tends to be easier for corners, as Zimmer has famously said. I think that's part of it. So I think it's a maturation of the defense in terms of their ability to understand what they need to understand, and a change in play calling that makes it easier on these dime store corners. So like, yeah, I think that's part of it. Troy Dye had a good game. I think he's been playing really poorly. Is that helped in this game? Eric Wilson seems to be a pretty boom-bust linebacker. You know, I said in the football machine that he was not very good this year, despite that interception. This game looked pretty good. And so he can create splash plays. I guess he's a good pass rusher as well. He can create splash plays, maybe make up for his deficiencies. So that's probably part of it too.
Also from Andrew Shad, is it better to have an avid rival sports fan for a significant other, or a 100% no sports non-fan? I appreciate not being crapped on each year at the Axe game, but sometimes I miss the rivalry dynamic of past relationships.
I much prefer to be in a relationship where they're engaged in sports at all.
Where they are or where they are not?
Where they are, yeah. Because if I'm excited about something and I can't really explain it, and my SO appreciates it, it loses some of the energy of me being excited a little. Being in a room where people are not into sports sucks when there's a game on, and this is kind of like that. I would want them to understand, even if they don't like why I'm excited, if they're a Packers fan or something like that, if they don't like why I'm excited, you at least understand at a visceral level that it's exciting, and you can build off of that, you can feed off of that. Whereas if they don't, and this is just me, it might be different for everybody, but if they're just not into sports at all, and they're totally accommodating, right? They're like, hey, Sundays are yours. Hey, understand, they got a Monday night game, so we got to adjust. If they're accommodating, that's different. But if they understand, that dynamic, I think is just a lot better. So
here's all the reasons why you're wrong.
I dated a Packers fan, and it was the worst relationship I've ever been in. So I get it, but I think that was just the person.
Yeah, I definitely have experience with that. And this was somebody who, as far as football was concerned, was fairly accommodating. It stopped being funny. It stopped being like a novelty, because especially if people knew, they would ask you, you'd get the question every time there'd be a rivalry game, divided house tonight. Really? No. And this was during the not good Vikings years. This was when Christian Ponder randomly showed up and won against the Packers. And you're just well, neither of us expected that to happen, but
great. Don't know what to do with this.
No, and then the worst part is that as a result, you're kind of put into a situation where you find yourself, quote unquote, cheering for their team during the Super Bowl, during a playoff run and or Super Bowl run, when in the a part of you is good for them, their team is going, and part of you is ugh, just no. I
think that's just the nature of the relationship you were in. I don't think that's endemic to being in a rival. Because I've been in relationships with people were fans of teams that were not necessarily rivals, but were not the Vikings. And I've watched their team in the playoffs, and I've cheered against that team, and it was fine. The Vikings and one of the relationships was the Falcons. And the Falcons played each other, and I cheered for the Vikings against the Falcons, and I dunked on her maybe a little bit too hard, but I mean, it's fine. It depends on the
I'm
dynamic.
Sure you had fun with her Twitter, just bouncing off, just slamming her the way you would on somebody's Twitter account until they just ghosted you.
I'm not delicate when it comes to sports, but it turned out fine, right? She got it. So and I've cheered again, like I said, I've cheered against her team in the playoffs and stuff. And so it's worked out for me.
It's much more fun to cheer against them, or cheer against other teams than cheer for. I did, because I'm a nice enough guy, I did find myself cheering for the Packers the year they won the Super Bowl, and I did feel incredibly dirty
obligation.
Afterwards. It
Obligation
was.
and gentlemanliness.
It's the same. It's the situation we talked about before, where it's the Pulp Fiction thing, where my girlfriend's a vegetarian, therefore I'm kind of a vegetarian.
Right, yeah.
You find yourself in that sort of situation. And it was
No,
definitely
I
during
get
the
it. I
year.
get it. Yeah.
Ugh, no. It is so much better the other way. It is not even funny. I don't even know if I had it like ruined for me. I just think it's so much better otherwise.
I think the answer to this question is very clearly, it clearly depends on the person you're with, because my experiences have largely been positive, and your specific experience was very negative, and I think that's the people that you're with is part of that.
Still unclean. Michael Chow asks, what is affected more due to Irv Smith being out? His run blocking, Cook's bad game, or his offensive efficiency?
I think it's the run blocking, which is not like a very typical answer from me, but like his play through the air has been like good, but it hasn't been extraordinary, right? Like it's clearly above replacement level, but you end up with Tyler Conklin in the game and you've got some receiving options anyway. Like it would have been nice to have Irv Smith on some of these passing plays where Conklin was in and wasn't open or anything like that. But like for the most part, whatever. But yeah, the Vikings had some pretty poor blocking on the edge that they could have used a, better blocking tight end for. Probably wouldn't have gotten one of those holding calls. So yeah, I think it's probably the run blocking. But yeah, I'm open to another possibility there.
Open to another interpretation?
Sure.
Hank asks, seriously, would long snapping the ball to Cordero have been a better option for the Bears than whatever the hell that last drive was?
I'm clearly against long snapping now. But a shotgun wildcat to Cordero? Yeah, that was actually my worry. I was worried that they would do that because I was like, that's got to be way better than Tennessee Sean Mannion back there. Unexpected. Like he was so not and I totally have sympathy for him, by the way. I just thought it was like kind of funny. He was so not ready for like the last drive of the game. Are you serious?
That wasn't Sean Mannion. Like, that was somebody else. Sean Mannion.
Yeah, I said Tennessee Sean Mannion.
Oh, okay,
it's Tyler Bray. He played at Tennessee. Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
I was confused there. The nickname didn't make any sense. Apologies.
Oh yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I just came up with it because I couldn't remember his name, honestly. But but no, this is Tyler Bray. He played at Tennessee with Cordero Patterson. He's tall and he doesn't move, so I thought Sean Mannion. But yeah, he's like 6'7", right? But yeah, he was clearly not ready. He was like, the look on his face wasn't exasperation or anything like that, but it was just like, he wasn't like upset or angry, but he was just like, are you kidding me? And he like takes the face mask off because like, of course he had a face mask on because he didn't expect to go in the game. And he like walks over to find his helmet wherever the hell it is. And he picks it up and he puts it on. He's like, I guess I'm playing.
All right, fine. I'll put the clipboard down if you're serious.
Right, like, which I don't think would have been what happened if it had occurred in like the middle of the third quarter, right? Like, I think he would have been a little bit more engaged. But it was just like, oh, the game's not over. All right. So like, that was just kind of a funny anecdote. But like, yeah, I mean, he's not a good quarterback. I mean, he was on the practice squad that was elevated for the game, right? Like, all he's there for is to be the Sean Mannion of a 2-quarterback room instead of the Sean Mannion of a 1-quarterback room. He's there to provide clipboard help and game day support and be good in the film room. That's all he's there for. And so is Cordero Patterson Wildcat like a great play? No. Is it more likely to get you 80 yards in 30 seconds? Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, that my biggest fear was that they were going to put the ball in his hands. And just like Cordero Patterson just takes the team on his back. Like, no, I've got you on this. I've got one return already. It's time. We're going to make this happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm way more scared that they're going to give him a pitch, and because it's Wildcat, there's an extra blocker on the field for you. And he goes to the outside, and it's just like the Baltimore game where he finds a seam and he just goes. Like, he's not great in terms of running back vision. But I can absolutely believe, and remember, Eric Kendricks just got injured. Like, he came back, but like, he just got injured, right? Troy Dye and Eric Wilson are on the field. They're not great at run stopping, right? You've got some pretty decent run stopping corners, but like, who would I take in a one-on-one in the open field? Cordero Patterson every single time. So, the Vikings will probably expect it coming, and Cordero Patterson on end arounds and on running back plays and probably on Wildcats, it has not been as effective after you've already shown that you're willing to do that, which they already did, and you know that they're going to run to the outside, which he does. He's been shut down a lot in the second half of seasons where he's been used heavily, especially with the Vikings, because teams know to shut down. So I'm not saying it's like this really high percentage chance play, but I'm saying it's there. And I don't think it's there for Tyler Bray throwing to Allen Robinson. Like, I think your chances of an 80-yard play are just higher with Cordero Patterson on his like revenge game kick at Soldier Field against the Vikings. Yeah. I wasn't terrified, but I was like worried that was going to be what they did. So yeah, I think honestly, maybe not long snapping, but shotgunning to Cordero Patterson with an extra blocker and a Wildcat. Yeah, and it would have been so funny. The longest run the Bears have had not all year, for the past 2 games has been an 11-yard fake punt, right? Like the guy who has it is a linebacker. It's Barkevius Mingo. Like their longest run is 11 yards over the past 2 games, and it's a linebacker. Like, of course the Vikings would break it on the very last play of the game to Cordero Patterson.
It had all the markings of a possible, like, moment there. There's nobody on that team that would have frightened me more than seeing Cordero Patterson at shotgun. Like, what are you
like
doing?
If they Hail Mary to one of the best 50-50 receivers in the NFL, Allen Robinson, and it would have been a repeat of the Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins play from the other night. Like, if they had done that, I would have been worried, right? But, like, I just saw Harrison Smith shut down a 50-50, right? To Allen Robinson specifically. Like, that is not as big a worry as Cordero Patterson making the Vikings look stupid.
There's a hypothetical in there. There's an intangible in there that you just can't quantify, and it sucks. And it's right there in the pit of your stomach, and its name is Cordero Patterson having a revenge game.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 touchdown Cordero Patterson. That's it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Don from Ohio asks, how much longer can the Vikings win despite the constant miscues by Cousins on both sides of the ball?
On both sides of the ball.
Don had a great explanation as to why the Austin cutting snap was Kirk Cousins' fault. It was truly impressive in the chat.
I wish I had remembered it. As soon as it happened, he was like, well, that's clearly Kirk Cousins' fault. I lost it.
I think Kirk Cousins got blamed for Nick Foles' injury too, so...
and he got blamed for the play where he scrambled for 15 yards to get a first down that got called back.
Yep, the hold.
Because the Dakota Dozier holding penalty. Because it's like, well, no way Dakota Dozier expected that to be a run. If Kirk Cousins hadn't a run, Dozier wouldn't have had to adjust his position and force the holding call. And I was like, Don, that was like the closest thing to a logical argument. I'm so annoyed at you right now.
How dare you make me like you for 30 seconds?
We'll see when Kyle Slater plays the Vikings in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Kyle Slaby asks the final question of the day, and it's for Arif's Pet Corner. No asking your girlfriend. I love my fur kids, but my cat Maddie will not stop chewing on my headphones. Why is she obsessed with the cord, and what can I do to make her stop?
So I love that Kyle was like, no, you cannot ask your girlfriend in the text of the question. My answer is they've got like spray that's supposed to deter cats. It doesn't necessarily last a long time, but it's odorless to humans, smells bad to cats. I would probably recommend that, but we ran out of it, and I just decided to switch to braided headphones and whatever brand that we got, and I wish I could remember it, but we're not sponsored anyway, so I don't feel obligated to say it. Has like just a little bit of metal in the braiding, and it's just enough to stop the cat from chewing through it, so they can keep chewing on it and it doesn't do anything. I'm sure if they like kept on going, it would probably do something, but for the most part, it doesn't do anything. So we did that, and recently the cat started chewing on the USB cable for Chelsea's mic, and we just switched to a braided USB cable, and the cat stopped chewing on that. So I would say probably switch to braided cables, especially if they've got some kind of lining in them. And I know that would mean for headphones, probably switching the brand of headphones. And if you really like your headphones, it's going to be tough. But you could probably try those cat sprays they hate. There's even I think there's even one that's like it smells like green apple, which I guess cats hate, and for the most part humans really like. So you could even do that where it's actually humans can smell it and it actually smells good. But yeah, that's my advice there. Again, I don't know anything about pets,
and I can't be around cats, so I have no idea. So we're gonna lean on Arif for that one, especially for Arif's Pet Corner. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We will be back later this week to talk about the matchup with the Cowboys and the potential quarterback, whoever it may be, whether it's Andy Dalton or your new favorite quarterback that's not from your Dukes. AAF legend.
Gilbert?
Yeah, I was going to say it's the AAF legend.
Yeah, Texas's best high school quarterback ever.
Yeah, let's go with that. So we will be back later this week to talk about that. Arif, what can they find for you over at The Athletic?
Yeah, well, I'm writing 2 articles tonight. Maybe I should not have recorded an episode. Players of the Week, which I did write a fair amount before the game, but still. Players of the Week, and then also a discussion of Justin Jefferson post-game. That's hopefully both of those will go up tomorrow morning. We'll see.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please check us out later this week when we talk about the Cowboys game. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that all things are possible through Ben DiNucci. And we will see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.